Help support Name Explained by leaving a like and a comment, sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel. The Ivory Coast, or to give it its correct French name, Côte d'Ivoire, has a name that is a relic of its past. In the 19th century, France claimed this area of Africa as part of their empire. One of the key exports from this land for the French was of course the ivory found on the elephants. And as this land was on the coast of West Africa, the name the Ivory Coast made all the sense in the world. It's literally a coast full of ivory that got exported around the world. Other parts of West Africa actually had similar names to the Ivory Coast during this time too, including the Gold Coast, the Pepper Coast, and most horrific of all, the Slave Coast. They all had these names because they were on this coast, and they all had a specific resource which they were most known for exporting. The majority of these names have fallen by the wayside. The Gold Coast is now Ghana, the Pepper Coast is now roughly Liberia, and the Slave Coast is now parts of modern Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. Only the Ivory Coast has maintained this older name. This means that the Ivory Coast has something of a unique name on the world stage. Most nation names can be put into one of four categories. They're either named after a group of people, a geographic feature, a cardinal direction, or one specific person. There are exceptions, however, and the Ivory Coast is kind of one of them. While it's named after a geographical feature, its coast, it is also named after its most popular export. Well, former most popular export. Off the top of my head, there really aren't many other nations named in this way. One that comes to mind quickest for me is Brazil, named after the Brazil wood tree the Portuguese found growing here and exported back to Europe. This all got me thinking, however, what if other countries were named in the same way that the Ivory Coast is named? By that I mean named after their biggest export, followed by something notable about their geography. This led me to finding 10 random countries via the website random.country and trying to deduce what they would be called if their names followed that same convention of the Ivory Coast. Is this a silly idea? Yeah it is. It's fun nonetheless, and if you want to get really analytical about this video, it could be to reflect an alternative history where other nations got colonized and were simply branded for what they were known for exporting. All in all, please don't take this one too seriously. There's lots of silly videos on the internet, why not add another one? The first random country I got was my favourite country and yours, the Netherlands. This is a great one to begin with, as this name already references a geographic feature. Netherlands translates roughly into the lowlands due to how flat and low the land is in this area. When it comes to the Netherlands' top export, I was taken aback at first. Its top export, according to a variety of sources, are various kinds of petroleum. When I think of top oil producing nations, the nation of clogs and windmills doesn't immediately come to mind. But it seems that the Netherlands has, quite literally, a rich history with the stuff. One of the largest oil companies on the planet has its ties to the nation, the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company, though it's now more commonly known as Shell. This means that if the Netherlands had a name more similar to the Ivory Coast, we could call it the Gas Lowlands, or maybe the Petrol Plains. The Netherlands has more than just oil, it would seem. Another popular export for this nation is cheese. Dutch cheese is very popular around the planet, with one source citing that cheese makes up $3.88 billion of revenue for the nation. Maybe we could call this nation the Cheeselands. The Netherlands is also a huge exporter of flowers too, being the world's top exporter of the things. The Flower Lowlands is perhaps a much prettier name. Moving on, the next country I got generated was Oman, found on the Arabian Peninsula. This nation is supposedly named after its founder. It seems that its most noticeable geographic feature is its coast, and its gulf. We could even reference the fact that it's on the tip of a peninsula in its name. Like the Netherlands, Oman is a key crude oil exporter too, something the entire Arabian Peninsula has become known for. We could call Oman the oil coast, or even the Petrol Peninsula. As well as crude oil, natural gas is a big export too, so maybe we could call this land the Gas Gulf. Next up, the random country generator gave me another personal favourite of mine, and possibly yours too, Japan. Japan and its native name of Nihon have origins meaning rising sun, which ties into its well-known nickname. Thankfully, to make this video more interesting, Japan's top export isn't oil or gas, but instead the machinery most known for using gas, Cars. Japan is well known for producing a huge variety of cars, including makes like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi to name a few. Japan supposedly made $83.1 billion in its car exports. As for the nation's geography, it is of course a series of islands. This means we could call Japan something like the Automobile Islands. Southeast Africa's Mozambique has a name coming from a nearby island with the same name. The nation takes up a huge amount of the continent's southeast coast, and its biggest export is actually the metal of aluminium. The Aluminium Coast is a pretty cool sounding name, I have to admit. Or Aluminum Coast, I ought to say too. Ireland, a nation close to home for myself, came up next. This name comes from the mythical figure of Iru, making it one of the few nations named after a mythological goddess. I did not expect Ireland's top export to be pharmaceutical products. This includes the likes of vaccines, chemicals, toxins, and even blood. Though the top blood exporter on the planet is actually Switzerland, they must have some good blood or something. In regards to the nation's geography, Ireland is of course on an island, so we could call it something like the Medicine Island, or perhaps the Medical Isle in ode to its nickname of the Emerald Isle. Slovakia, named after the Slovak people, in Europe is something of a landlocked country, so its geographic feature probably won't be something like a coast, and it definitely isn't an island. The nation is particularly mountainous however, so we could definitely call it the Something Mountains. And that something is actually cars. Like Japan, Slovakia produces a huge amount of cars, so we could maybe call it the Car Mountains. Slovakia, however, also seemingly produces a lot of television equipment too, including video displays and broadcasting equipment. So maybe we could call this nation the TV Mountains, which creates quite an image in the mind, that's for sure. We could go even more niche and name the land after its main television channel, which from what I can gather is one called Jednotka. I might be wrong on that though. While I don't claim to be an expert on anything in particular, I'm definitely not an expert on Slovakian television culture. The next random country I received was Malaysia, which resides in Southeast Asia. This name comes from the Malay language / people and ia meaning land of, as I'm sure we all know by now. Malaysia is one of those nations that produces a lot of things. Their top export however is electricals. Various devices are manufactured here, including smartphones and computers. Malaysia also has interesting geography too. The main part of the nation includes a peninsula tip in Asia, as well as land on part of the island of Borneo. This gives us a ton of different geographic features to work with. We could call Malaysia the smartphone peninsula, or even the device coast. Then I was presented with Canada, the huge country with a name coming from a native word for village. Canada is once again another nation with petroleum as its biggest export, so let's ignore that one for now. They also export a lot of cars, something we saw with Japan and Slovakia, and gold, interestingly enough. Let's go with gold as their export because we haven't seen that one before. The real issue with Canada is figuring out what geographic feature to highlight in their name. Canada has so much variety in its geography, from mountains to lakes to coast and island. The Gold Mountain sounds pretty badass though, so let's go with that one. Grenada is a small island nation in the Caribbean Sea, close to the continent of South America. It's most likely named after the Spanish city of Granada. As a much smaller nation than the ones previously covered, it means that its top export isn't something like petrol or cars or electronics. It is instead a big exporter of naturally grown products like olive oil, tomatoes, and spices like nutmeg and mace. So we could call Grenada the Olive Island, which is a pretty nice sounding name now that I think about it, or even the Tomato Island. The final country I randomly generated was Pakistan. Pakistan actually has one of my favourite country etymologies that I shan't spoil here, but I have a whole video about it somewhere on the channel. Pakistan has a variety of geographical features ranging from desert to forest to mountains. We have ample to choose from. As for its biggest export, well, that honour goes to a variety of textiles. This includes linens, sweaters and suits. We could call this nation the clothing desert or the textile woods. Pakistan also produces a huge amount of rice too, so we can name it the Rice Mountains. Not quite as cool as Canada's Gold Mountains, but I personally think rice is way more valuable than gold. While that's 10 nations, I wanted to do one extra, that being my own nation of the United Kingdom. I was curious to know what would become of my nation if it was branded as little more than what we exported the most of. The UK's top export is actually cars out of anything, so we could be the car islands like Japan too. Wikipedia also includes gas turbines, gold, and hard liquor in our top 10. The one that struck me the most, however, was paintings. British artists are celebrated across the globe, so this makes sense. It's surprising to see it's one of the top 10 exports, however. The painting aisles have a wonderful ring to it, I have to admit. And it's also kind of fitting how the name Britain comes from the Bretonnic people who were known as the Painted People. Anyway, that's just 11 nations, and it's kind of likely I didn't mention yours at all. Let me know what you think your nation would be named if it followed the same naming convention as the nation that started me down this strange rabbit hole, the Ivory Coast. And once again, I just really need to stress that this is a really silly video, which none of you should take too seriously. Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/Name Explain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.